into this. I thought that was an excellent presentation. So again, this is will be a public hearing. So this is to set the stage for the public to comment on it next. But if you have any questions right now for staff, go ahead, Denise.
Yes, Garrett, great presentation. I noticed in some of the early recommendations that there was note to, and it used the word encourage this kind of building or density in low income or BIPOC communities. And I think for some reason that triggered me. It's like, why only in low income communities? Why don't we say we should encourage density throughout the city of Bremerton, right? But I didn't notice that language in your recommendations and any of the code changes that you're proposing. Is that correct? Will there be language around that?
There isn't. That was straight from the federal guidance document that was lifted from their recommendations, and it was saying in particular that it matters in low-income neighborhoods and in communities of color, that this could affect them more positively potentially. But that
or they could move into the other neighborhoods if it was built there.
Right, and
that's
encouraging density
my
everywhere.
point. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very important point, to make. Bremerton has a strong track record, I believe, in affordable housing. I'm also really thrilled to see that Bremerton Housing Authority, that you're including that, in this religious organization, kudos. I love seeing that partnership get stronger and stronger and stronger. And then my last question, and it possibly Director Spencer might wanna, because we had some exchange. Remember, I went to that Association of Washington Cities conference, and on the table in this discussion, there was this brochure, this flyer that cited Bremerton, right? But the thrust, and you quickly wrote and said, wait a minute, hold the presses, take that out of there. And I kind of felt good about that, like, oh, I brought this to her attention. On the other hand, what that AWC handout or flyer was really insinuating was that this middle housing sounds great, infill to, whatever we want to call it, and I think it looks great, and intuitively I think it should work, right? It would be successful. What they were proposing, I think, or insinuating, was a lot of jurisdictions have adopted this and no developers are coming to the table. It's not really being utilized at the level. And so I'm thinking that these further changes that you're making are hopefully going to entice that type of development even further. But I would like, Andrea, if you would, or Garrett, if you would just that's just nagging me from that conference, that was the data that they were putting out. Of course, it was mistaken when it came to Bremerton.
I think you've nailed it on the head. I mean, it's a lot of what the AWC was trying to put together is facts and data that goes along with it. And in our case, they read our code wrong and they said, oh, you don't have any, your permits aren't turning out, but they had read our code that we were permissive of these things. They read our code that we were permissive of ADUs and nothing's happening. Well, the ADU code didn't change until recently. And we know how long does it take to turn a ship around? Quite some time, because it's big, and getting people even knowledgeable that we have this available, it's going to take time. So there's going to be years of permit statistics that are going to have to be pulled to know when was the right point where the ship really started to turn. And I think every jurisdiction in Puget Sound, I just came back from the Planning Directors Conference, everybody is working on this right now. I'm hearing from all the jurisdictions about their ways that they're trying to get at this, and the market still needs to follow as well. well. And so AWC is trying to put together handouts that show it doesn't follow. And I absolutely believe we need more partnership with developers to get them to take advantage of these provisions. And what else is in the way for making them take advantage of the code provisions that we put in place? I think we can't rest on our laurels with stopping with zoning code changes. There's got to be other things that happen that make this go.
I was delighted to see Garrett share that information from that Target Housing conference. It was an excellent conference. I hope that we continue to stay involved with that effort, because I think it's a continuing effort. So thank you, Andrea, for that information. And thank you, Garrett, for a great presentation.
Okay, Quinn.
Thank you. Garrett, Andrea, thank you so much for all the work that you put into this. I love seeing stuff like this come out of the administration, because I really do believe that we have to build and think outside of the box in the ways to get to affordable housing and ensure that long-term residents are still able to stay here. I only have two questions. The first one is, what is the reasoning to give just religious and BHA organizations the density bonus? Is that because the market isn't really interested in those low income, affordable housing developments, or are there nonprofits or other developers that would want to take advantage of that? So I want to just kind of hear the reasoning behind those two exceptions. And then the other one is, I'm not sure, Garrett, when you were reading the protected classes that religious organizations wouldn't be able to discriminate against, I didn't hear gender identity or gender expression, and I just wanted to get confirmation on that.
Yeah, it doesn't call out specifically gender identity or gender expression. It does call out the Federal Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, so we could potentially see if those are covered under that act. So it was some examples, but not necessarily all classes that would be protected by the act. I can follow up on whether that would be included.
I believe the last Supreme Court ruling that came out around employment law at least covers gender expression and gender identity under sex, and case law will support that, but I would be more comfortable actually just putting it in as actual protected classes if we're able to do and go above and beyond the federal requirements there. Just my 2 cents there, but I would love to hear about why just religious organizations in the BHA.
So religious organizations, because we are mandated by the state, they left kind of a messy RCW for jurisdictions to deal with. Right now, a religious organization could approach the city and essentially demand a density bonus, and we would need to negotiate in good faith on an individual basis on what that would mean. And this is having a code provision for it provides an actual process so that you know what you're asking for, what we're willing to give, and what criteria you need to meet. So it just makes that state mandated process more clear and reasonable. The Bremerton Housing Authority, we could have included other nonprofits potentially, but this would be the much smaller impact, being with our greatest community supporter in the Bremerton Housing Authority, with a proven track record of producing affordable housing and doing it in a responsible way. So this is more cracking the faucet open and seeing how this goes. And if the Planning Commission and Council wishes more in the future, then that's something that staff could potentially be directed to do. But this was kind of a more conservative approach.
And if I could add to it too, is that our thought process was that most agencies that want to do housing, so take Pendleton Place, for example, Kitsap Mental Health partnered with BHA. So we think that any projects that are going to come forward by local agencies that want to do housing, more than likely they're going to partner with BHA in the end anyway. So we thought that that was a decent end and a good place to start, having never put our toe in this water yet.
Excellent. Thanks for that. That's all for me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anna.
Thank you. So first I wanted to say that Garrett, you have really become very good at this public performance, public presentation thing. Well done, you. I also wanted to go to the exact same section that Quinn was in, 20.58.100, the new section, and in D4, I'd like to make sure that religious beliefs and or affiliation are also not something that can potential tenants can be discriminated against because of whatever religious beliefs they have, or whatever religion they are affiliated with or none. So I would very much like to see that language in there. So the next thing I'd like to do is really specifically directed at Councillor Younger, who has not liked the ADUs in some senses a few times, and worried about the effect of cluster housing in, for example, his neighborhood. So I'm going to specifically address this cluster on Snyder. And then there's another cluster. Is that correct? Cluster housing? Am I using the right term?
Cottage housing.
Okay, cottage housing on Snyder that's grouped around a central lawn. And then if you go down to the end of Arvon, the north end of Arvon, there's another one, or two of them actually. And it's a completely different feeling. I have a lot of I had a lot of apartment buildings in my district, and you'd knock on a door and just, nothing. Either they'd be there or they wouldn't. But in the cluster housing, people were on their porches. They were actually using, they actually were forming a community. The architecture was working. Like I'd knock on a door and somebody pop their head out and go, they're not going to be home until 4. Or if you've got something for them, you can leave it with me. We go to the same childcare place. And that was it was lovely. And the people who were living in them were postal employees, shipyard workers, of course, and just, school aides, Bremerton School District aides. It was just really a lively community, as though like a large extended family had moved in down the street to a big house with a big yard. Okay, so I'm totally I love the idea. Okay, so under 20.60.040 in B6, D6, E5, and H2, the references to observe landscaping standards per 20.50, the Bremerton City Code landscaping standards. I'd like to suggest that these be altered to maximize preservation of existing trees where possible. Obviously, you're not going to say you can't have a house here, the tree is more important. But where it's possible to do both, I would suggest that instead of an arboriculturalist being hired by the applicant, that the DCD or someone else in the city approve the hiring of said arboriculturalist to make sure that they are someone who has experience preserving large trees. Because I've worked with hazard tree people, and some of them are like, all trees are hazard trees, and there's just all trees must come down, they are a hazard. So I think that would be really pleasant. And one of the groups of duplexes that you showed, Garrett, it's not Holly, is it Holly Court? Anyhow, the adjacent large trees really add character to that development. So where it's possible, I would hope that the intent of the landscaping standards could be carried out. That's it for me.
All right, thank you. Jeff.
Awesome. All the thanks everyone already said for a lot of work in this. Couple questions. So with the religious organizations, I think I was having trouble kind of understanding the RCW. So this is probably one for legal, would like Salvation Army or Coffee Oasis be considered a religious organization? because they have language in their organizational bylaws, or would it strictly be more churches, mosques, synagogues, etc.?
I could read out the definition of what an religious organization is per RCW if you like. The
Sure.
applicant would need us to would need to demonstrate they meet that.
Yeah, I think that, if you don't mind, Garrett, reading that out. I was having trouble locating it just now.
Sure, if you
Thanks.
have any other questions while I look that up.
Oh, sure, no worries. Yeah, I'll come back to that one. And to follow up on that conversation from the planning commission meeting, again, it seems like we could extend the bonus to all nonprofit organizations if we wanted to, but best practice right now, it seems like the recommendation is keep it to just Kids Up Housing Association, and then what we can expand in the future if needed. If I got that right, that option is on the table to do all nonprofits, but okay, I see Andrea nodding her head. That's fine, cool. Thinking ahead to the public hearing, is it possible to get the full resolution figure? There's two figures, page 4 and 5 of the memo, which is 247 and 248 of our PDF. And where I'm kind of going is I'd love to see, if it's not too much work for the public hearing, just a real like before and after. Specifically like before, this is currently where duplexes, triplexes are allowed, and then after it's going to be a much more boring map, but basically here's the where they're going to be allowed. And same for the cottage housing. I think that would just be really good to have out there, and a real clear side by side for all the residents. So I'll put that idea out there. And then 2 more for the planning commission minutes. So it seems like comments were solicited from KBR and KCAR. I don't know, there's a presentation to keep KBA, but was it the case they wrote in something positive, or they just hadn't sent in any written comments at all yet?
I believe that they're both in the audience tonight, and just conversationally, they were supportive, but it was just conversations. Okay.
Well, yeah, I see Randall King and Jim's Claw there. So if you folks want to write something in for the public meeting, I'd appreciate it, just so we hear from you as well as everyone else. On the net to gross change, I want to make sure I got this right. So I'm going to do kind of an extreme example, but with the R10, if we had a 1 acre parcel, obviously you could have 10 units. But with this change, if 90% of that acre parcel was wetland, road, utility, etc., so only 10% was buildable, with this net to gross change, does that mean you could put 10 units on that 0.1 acre? So
that is where the kind of reality would set in here on height limitations, on how many parking spaces you would need to provide for those 10 units, what development types are allowed. So that the idea is you could fit as many units into that remaining area as is feasible from a development standpoint. But to say that you'd be able to fit 10 units in 1/10 of an acre is incredibly unfeasible, particularly because we don't currently allow for stacked flats, like 1 unit over another in for a duplex or a townhome.
And that's what I was kind of wondering too, if the height limit was super high. I know some zones have no height limits, then could you build a fairly narrow but super tall structure that would look really out of place? I just want to make sure.
35 feet is the maximum height in the R10 zone.
And thank you. Okay. Because where there's unlimited height is obviously not R10. Okay. So it would have to be, okay, so that wouldn't work. All right, I just wanted to think that through. Last comment I had, I guess before you get to the definition of religious section, is I'm just thinking ahead to the public hearing. So I assume the current request on the table is to take a vote after the public hearing. Is that right?
Correct.
So I just want to make sure if we get, like, let's say for some reason there's really strong pushback against cottage housing. I'm just picking that at random. Everyone loves the rest of it, but we got 100 people who hate the idea of cottage housing. Could a council member make a motion to not include that section, or would we be better off making a motion to table it and saying, oh, we got some strong feedback here. Let's see if we have a majority to table it, and then see if we can get at the next study session and incorporate that public feedback and then bring it back to a normal session at a later date.
I can defer to Kylie here, but the proposal is to pass a motion next week. You are not obligated to do so. So you can put a motion on the table and amend the ordinance as you see fit, and do that creatively through lots of amending motions. You don't have to put in a motion on the table. You could delay that. The only thing you're obligated to do next week is to have a public hearing, and that's to receive feedback. You don't have to act.
Okay, cool. Thanks for clarifying that. I just want to make sure that we thought that through. Back to you, Garrett, if you have the exact religious organization definition.
Thank you for your patience. Yeah.
Thank you.
So per RCW 2604-007, religious organization includes but is not limited to churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, non-denominational ministries, interdenominational and ecumenical organizations, mission organizations, faith-based social agencies, and other entities whose principal purpose is the study, practice, or advancement of religion.
Okay, so I
can put that in the
chat. The
too.
two in there was that I think might apply to specifically. I'm thinking it was mission. He's talking about his mission and faith-based social organizations.
Right, and I think the key is at the end when it says or others or entities whose principal purpose is the study, practice, or advancement of religion.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, if legal gets a chance to take a look at it between now and next week, I'd kind of like to know their thoughts if possible, if like Salvation Army, Coffee Oasis, maybe think of some others in the community would apply or not. I'm taking up enough time, so thank you all.
All right, thank you. Eric.
Yeah, first of all, I want to start off by saying thank you for sending the mailers out today and tomorrow. So everyone that's affected, that is appreciated. And I'm going to reserve any opinions until after the public hearing, which I think is everyone has done so far, and that's the proper course. I'm going to ask you some questions so you're not surprised next week. And I think that's only fair as well. So if you don't have the answers, you got a week to decide. First thing, Garrett, is you mentioned in your presentation 2 House bills and 2 Senate bills that the state legislature, and correct me if I'm wrong, tried to mandate this very type of zoning, upzoning, if you will. I don't know if that's the proper term. Across the state, and we have a Democratic House, Democratic Senate, Democratic governor, and apparently no legislation was passed. Why is that?
I can speculate on that, but I can't tell you definitively that taking away the discretion of local jurisdictions is not something that is easily done.
Yeah, so I guess I can do the research on that. Maybe I need to, but Ms. Spencer, Director Spencer, do you have any more information? You go to these planning meetings with the other directors. Can you give me the scoop?
Yeah, I mean, the only scoop that I know, and maybe the mayor can make a comment, is that there were a lot of organizations like AWC that tried to convey to the legislature that we exist as cities because we're supposed to be the voice of the people and we get to shape our communities. It's been the premise of GMA since the beginning, and there would be no top-down direction. And but a lot of legislators didn't care, and they were just powering ahead. And I think that a lot of people, like mayors of small communities, were talking to their legislators to say, hey, look, don't take this local control away from us. But we've seen it year after year after year, and I don't think it's going away. And it'd be great if we can get something on the record that allows us to do it before we get some state mandate that makes us do it. And I do want to clarify that this isn't necessarily an upzone. They still have to meet all the density standards. It's just a different kind of housing type that's allowed. They still have to meet the no more than 10 dwelling units per acre. So What the state legislators were doing, were saying, you make this housing type that's allowed. They did allow us to keep local control for the standard of how many dwelling units per acre. And that's all we're doing here. We aren't increasing the density with this proposed ordinance.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's enough. I don't need any more clarification. That was a good response. Thank you. The next question, Garrett, the maximum density, gross acre versus net acre. I don't expect you to have this information on hand, but can you give me by next week, or just send it an email, the definition of maximum density for all the other jurisdictions in Kitsap County? Do they use gross acre or net acre? Because this is the first time, I've been around a while, that I've heard that this has been an issue. So I'd like to know how the other jurisdictions treat that definition. That's just an interesting one, because I mean, you could argue, well, this is a way to get more density, just kind of a backdoor approach, and I don't want to accuse you of that. So I want to hear what other jurisdictions do, or is this just a unique thing, and now we're trying a new and innovative technique? So the other thing, I was really disappointed. Councilmember Fry pointed it out, and when I saw it, I was like, holy cow, really? And this is out of our control. It's not anything the Planning Commission has said or the city has said. I don't think it's in our packet. I went through the packet, and maybe I'm wrong, but can the council get a copy of the Biden-Harris report? In particular, it was in your slide, Garrett, where it said that, maybe you need to call it up because I don't want to accuse it of being incorrect on this, but it said something to the effect that this is especially recommended for low-income communities and communities of color. Why wouldn't you recommend it for everywhere? Why not Bainbridge Island? Holy cow, if they need affordable housing and you want to encourage low-income people and people of color to have nice houses and nice communities, not that Bremerton's not a nice community, don't get me wrong, but what the hell? Excuse my language. Shame on that. So I'd like to see that document. That just got me stoked, really. And again, nothing against the city. It's just, wow, what a document. So maybe that was taken out of context. So I want to give everybody the benefits. I'd like to see the entire document, if that's okay. I'm sorry if you get excited on that one. The other thing, and this is just to clear my memory. So the ADU one, I think Councilmember Mockler mentioned it. Yeah, I wasn't excited about expanding it to 2, and I don't want to rehash everything, but I had concerns that expanding to 2 ADUs on a single family lot basically circumvents our zoning, R10 zoning, and there was like, oh, that's not going to happen, whatever. I don't know exact words we're saying, but it's in the packet. Yes, it does. And you guys pointed it out, and that's fine. I mean, I knew that's going to happen. So as far as I'm concerned, the horse is out of the barn, or whatever analogy you want to use. Help me clear up in my mind the difference between a duplex, a triplex, or a townhouse, and a home with 2 ADUs. I'm going to start by trying to provide you the definition or the differences, and Garrett, you tell me where I'm wrong, okay? All right, so a duplex or a townhouse, the units have to be the same size or similar size. But the ADU, there's the primary building, and then there's up to 2 smaller buildings, but they can't be the same size as the primary building. Am I correct so far? Okay, so maybe I'm even teaching the council something on this, I don't know. So anyways, because if there wasn't that difference, you're right. I'm just going to last year's ADU laws, and I'm saying, the heck with all this other crap with your extra parking, because I'm much better under the old rules. So I'm trying to figure out why we need to do this to encourage more housing. And then the other advantage that I'm seeing is for lots. So under the existing rules, you can build 1 house with 2 ADUs, but if you have a lot that's zoned R10, especially with the net acre definition, there's a good possibility you could have 4 or more units. So you could have 4 duplexes versus if it's ADU, you only could have a house and 2 ADUs. Am I correct on that one too? No. Okay, help me out.
You're only allowed to
Garrett,
have
if you could add just this notion of 0 lot line too. He's not asking, but I think it would be helpful to understand.
Okay, so you're allowed to have 1 primary use in the R10 zone. So you can have 1 duplex on a lot. You couldn't have 2 duplexes on a lot. Now, the reason that there's like you can have 3 accessory dwelling units on a lot that are all detached. Excuse me, you can have 1 primary residence and 2 ADUs that are detached because they're accessory uses. So you could only have, like I said, 1 duplex, 1 structure on a lot. You couldn't have more than 1 duplex.
Okay, but you could have a townhouse, and how many? What's the definition of a townhouse then?
So I'd be happy to bring that up.
Yeah.
To say, you want me to read out the specific definition?
Well, I mean, I prefer layman's terms. I'm not that smart. So
Yeah, this is
just tell me.
And this is where I was afraid of where he was going, is that a townhouse has a lot line that runs between 2 halves. So it's only 1 unit on a lot. And I think that's why, and that's what's typically called a 0 lot line, because the building is built right up to the line. Each is on its own lot. And so you can imagine the development complexities of having to do a subdivision process, which raises the housing cost. And that's why I said it was important to add to this conversation.
So a duplex is 1 lot. You can have 2 units and you can have separate ownership, and then they have common ownership of the land underneath. Is that what you're telling me?
You could.
Okay, that's the difference then. Okay. Whereas a townhouse, that's fee simple. Everyone owns the land underneath their home.
Yeah.
Correct? Is that what we're saying?
Well, actually, if it's essentially townhomes are row housing, so you could have 1 structure of townhomes on 1 lot, but you couldn't have more than 1 structure. So just the same, like you can't have 2 duplexes, you can't have more than 2 separate structures. So you couldn't have a row of townhomes and then start over in another location and add another row of townhomes. You can have 1 townhome structure, singular, that it can include several side-by-side units.
Okay, and I want to ask this question because I don't want to confuse the hell out of people next week. So let me get this out of my system. If I have a townhome, individual lot, I have my own townhome. I'm in a group of 3 townhomes in a row. We have each own our own lot. Can I have an ADU in the back of my townhome?
No.
No.
ADUs are only allowed with single-family homes.
Okay. All right. And I had one other question and I lost it. So I won't call, although Denise is smiling and I'm not going to allude to her age, but I guess technically I'm a senior. I get the invitations for the AARP. So I'm having a senior moment. It was that last question and I'm going to reserve the right to come back to it. So thank you.
All right, we'll go to Jennifer.
That's why it's good to wait, Eric, because you asked a couple of questions, not the smarter questions, but some of the sillier questions I was going to ask. But I still just townhomes, just as an example. So townhomes, I'm thinking of Schley, right? We have, what do we call that? East Park? What do we call that area? Okay, so those are townhomes, right?
Right.
Okay, and so there's like 4, 5, 6 all in a row. That's an example of a town. Those are townhomes. So they're single dwelling units. Each have their own teeny tiny little lot, right? And okay. Okay. And so which agency, or is this the Biden-Harris report that Eric was alluding to, the agency that's calling on us to fill in the gaps with the missing middle housing?
It was from the White House.
But they're not a specific agency?
No, just the White House.
Just the White House. Okay. I saw it said whitehouse.org. So I did, but I just was wondering, is there a agency or is it just the administration asking for this. Not just, I mean, okay. And so I'm just going to kind of go through a couple of, I just need clarification here. This is all new to me. I'm still new. Like I said to Mike earlier, Mr. Riley. So some of the things that you talked about were areas that were slated to be annexed one day are already implementing these strategies, correct?
Correct.
So just to clarify, so if when we annex these areas, if we don't adopt a code, it's going to be problematic, or would they be grandfathered in? Would those homes?
Any areas we annex would be grandfathered into the
Okay.
development that's existing.
You were just bringing that to, to show us, well, they're already doing it. So here are some areas that are already doing it. Okay. And so I am going to go back to that religious organization example. Okay. The crux that we have with that. I think that what I appreciate about what you're doing with this ordinance is you're trying to shore it up so that not just any religious organization can come and apply for the bonus density. Is that correct? You want to actually you want to codify it so that we have limits on which religious organizations are coming to apply for the bonus density. Am I correct in understanding the intent of that?
I would say we're codifying what our expectations are, because right now they can come in and demand the world, and with the way the RCW is written, we have to give it to them. And so what the importance of what we're doing is we're setting limits on what that density bonus is, and that's the most important, more so than defining who qualifies for it. Because I think every single case that we get, if a religious institution came to us, we're going to be working closely with the city attorney's office to see if they meet the definition under the RCW. So I don't really want to write extra definitions beyond what the RCW has for religious institutions. Just appending NBHA was important to us because we thought it was, we as staff, as well as the Planning Commission, thought it was important to give density bonuses to an agency that has a track record, high gold standard of providing housing.
I appreciate that too. And so rather than defining the types of religious organizations, you want to put parameters, you want to codify parameters so that they don't just, like you say, demand the world.
Yes.
Can you give me an example? Okay. So we know that there are religious nonprofits that are already implementing low-income housing programs. And some of these are recovery based, right? And I can think of a few examples myself. And so, as much as I don't like the trend towards, religious nonprofits receiving this money, I do appreciate that this could benefit the recovery community. So that they could receive additional tax credits. Now the reason, there's a long history that I'm not gonna give too much history because I don't know a lot of history, but I do know that there is a huge lobbying effort of religious organizations, and they fall under a lot of tax shelters, and that's why they're able to, harness a lot of these programs and get the, backing of legislators and Congress, etc. Whether or not I agree with it is neither here nor there, because I'm just on city council in Bremerton. But I wondered if you might just give us examples of programs that, just off the top of your head, are you comfortable giving us examples of programs that might? No. Okay, there's a no there.
It's a brand new RCW, and I believe it's only City of Tacoma that has implemented this. So there's no example projects for us to look to. There's been a couple agencies that talked to us about potentially using this and just lob some questions at us, but never anything stuck to the wall. So I can't even begin to pontificate who might come forward to use these provisions.
No problem. I just have a couple more questions. Kylie, this is a question for legal. Could we run into, any issues if we add additional language for sexual identity, orientation, religious, non-religious beliefs, as non-discriminators? Do you, yeah, you know what I'm saying?
I have it in my notes that we were going to add two things. I typed a message to Garrett, so I'm going to read over here. We're going to add two provisions to the ordinance before it comes to the public hearing, to add non-discrimination for religious beliefs and affiliations, as well as no discrimination for gender identity and or expression. So I have two notes that we're going to add those, and we'll work with Kylie to update the ordinance before next week.
Thank you. This may be semantics, but not everybody has a religious belief. So sometimes it's a non-religious belief. I don't know if there's anything you can put in. Okay. And I just want to encourage council. I feel like we might all be on the same page, that we probably want to take this to a study session to discuss further, rather than after we hear public comment, rather than having a long debate. I feel like I just want to encourage council. Can we please, especially since I'm chairing next
Is
meeting.
it scheduled for a vote next week or just a public hearing?
I think that's what I heard, is that an amendment is going to, or that an amendment is going to be brought forward for us to consider, but that we can table it.
It is
Go ahead.
scheduled for a public hearing and a vote. So there's a motion on the floor, and there's nothing saying that you have to make a motion.
I'm sorry, I said amendment, but I meant motion. So if we don't make a motion, what then happens to this proposal?
Can I ask a question too? So if we take it back to a study session and modify it, do we have to have another public hearing?
Ordinarily you do. I would recommend, but I
Oh.
will toss to Kylie for that.
I think so, because the public then is having a chance to have the public hearing on that particular version.
Got it.
I feel like I'm hearing pretty good support for this.
Okay.
But yeah, anyways, next week, if you can start a discussion and somebody could motion to just, table it to the next week.
Well, I'll leave that up to council. I guess now I understand the process a little more.
Yeah.
I think just give me, that was it for now. And I think that's all for tonight on that.
Great. Jeff?
Few last thoughts from the other comments. On the net to gross, to go back to that, I guess Sandra and Garrett, do you have a rough feeling of how many parts in the city have a buildable area of like less than 0.5? Like, I'm a little worried about it, but in the back of my head, I'm like, if it's only a tiny few parcels that have a small fraction, then I'm not as worried about it. If most of the parts in the city are like 0.9 or higher, it doesn't
And
really matter.
here's what we see is that most of the time the development is limited by the footprint of which they can develop. So setbacks, height limits, et cetera, is usually the limiting factor. It isn't the density that does it. Garrett, you want to add any specific permit examples? You're muted.
Thank you. I don't have one, but that essentially you could build a single family home with unlimited size within that same area. You're still limited by that same development area. So there isn't a cap on how much you can develop in that buildable area. Does that make sense? So you're only allowed to develop in a certain amount of area. This would just be what goes on in that area and how many units you could fit into it. So like there's a 60, pardon me.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's lot coverage requirements, but then it's what kills a project every single time is how do you park it? Every single unit has to provide 2 parking spaces. So the fact that you've got to get 2 parking spaces in there and the setbacks, I just don't think that this is really going to create a problem.
Okay, thanks for sticking on that a little longer.
And so to answer your question, can we do a GIS analysis that figures that question out? No, I mean, that's a considerable amount of analysis of buildable lands, trying to figure out what's out there, what's vacant. How can we even begin to figure out what might flip in this amount of time? It's a pretty heavy lift.
Yeah, I figured that getting an exact answer would be a lot ridiculous, but I figure if you just had a rough thought in your head, if you think the vast majority above 0.5, then that's fine.
What Garrett can do is he could pull some recent plats that had critical areas, and he can kind of show you a couple of examples, and we can send that via email with the 2 things that we're going to send, which is how other Kitsap jurisdictions calculate this and how they define max density, and as well as the Biden report, we'll just throw in a couple of recent plat examples.
Sure, if you have time, it definitely be lower on my priority list compared to those other items, but if you have the time, that's much appreciated.
Hey, Jeff, can I just ask you to clarify what your concern is about that?
It was, oh yeah, it was just the, you know, if you have a fraction of, if you had a section of town and there was 1 or 2 lots that just had a small buildable area, if all of a sudden you'd get a real high density structure in there that normally wouldn't be able to go in with this change.
Right.
It's not a major concern. I just want to make sure it's fleshed out.
Right, because if we can flesh out any real concerns we have tonight, it'll make next week go smoother for everyone.
Right, yeah, that's they're cool. Sorry, quick comments is, I think, Eric, the bill you were mentioning, if I remember right, I was concerned about it as too, because it was going to increase the actual underlying density. So from like R10 to R15 for all areas within a certain distance of transit centers. So if that's the one I'm thinking of, I remember I was concerned a bit about like downtown in my district, of course, is already conforming, but Manette would have been upscaled. So if that's what you're thinking of, I just want to make sure that was clear, because then in this case, we're not changing that R10 like that bill would have done. So hopefully I got that right. The last thing, a smart aleck on the ADUs. I think you can have 2 same size ADUs if the principal unit is 1,000 square feet or less, to get real nitpicky there, if I might remember that code. So that's it. Last comment is just, I think Eric makes a good point though, of all these different housing types might be real helpful, like almost 1 per slide to lay out there for the public, because we're obviously, it's hard to keep all straight in our heads. So I think the public might struggle a bit too. So anyway, that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Quinn.
Thanks. In the interest of making sure that the debate next week is limited, I would like to offer, kind of to Jennifer's point, possibly creed as a protected class and lack of religion or creed as a protected class as well, especially if we're offering this to religious organizations. I would not want non-believers like myself being turned away.
Is creed you're saying creed is an alternate term of phrase versus religious beliefs?
So yeah, WALAD, Washington Law Against Discrimination, and City of Seattle includes creed as a protected class, which is like a non-religious set of beliefs. Like if you are a humanist, or if you have a moral ethical code that's not based in religion, that's also protected. I think that might be a good protected class to add, and then also for lack of religion or creed.
So creed is currently included.
Oh, excellent. Great.
But again, I think the point is, or lack of creed or religion too. Okay. Quinn, is that it?
Yep, that's right.
Anna.
If my other counselors are in agreement. Thanks a lot.
Anna.
Yes, although I don't think of not having a religion as a lack, but okay. I just wanted to say that was a very persuasive argument, Andrea, that how long the lag is between when an ordinance is passed and when it fully enters the public's imagination, and when the permit is done and the buildings are finished and the C of O, the certificate of occupancy, is issued. I thought that was a very persuasive argument. Thank you both for this whole thing. All done.
All right, Eric.
All right, I got my notes here, so no moments here. First, an observation for the council that you gave an example of cottage housing in the city limits, Snyder. I think that you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was there when I was the council member of District 6, going way back. I could be wrong, but I think those houses are that old. It's interesting how, go ahead, Anna, am I correct?
They got renovated seriously.
Yes, they were in much poorer shape. So that probably goes back 30, 40 years. That's not a negative or a positive comment. I'm just saying, the reason I bring that up is I believe the county has had this zoning in place for a long time on the cluster homes. Now, I want to give you an example, and you've probably all seen it. If you go down Chico Way on the waterfront, on the right-hand side of that waterfront, there are I believe that's a cluster. It's got it actually has a separate building, a community building for the 8 or 10 houses there. It's very nice. I'm not sure the neighbors appreciated it, at least when they first were put in, because it really increased the zoning or the density, but I think it looks nice. It's on Chico Way. I can't give you you'll see it. Probably closer towards Silverdale, but you'll find it if you want to drive by there. And I remembered my questions. And Garrett, you brought this up, and starting to make sense because I don't see this housing type in Bremerton for duplexes. We don't allow flats. We don't allow them build on top of each other. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
In the low density residential zone, correct?
Okay. And the reason is?
I think it's just a departure for what we have been permitting to this point in time.
Okay, I'm not saying pro or con, I was just kind of curious. I always like to know reasoning behind things. So brings up, I got two other, one of the slides you had be careful, they look like townhomes, but you may call them duplexes, I don't know, on Lafayette. And you said that the council changed the ordinance and no longer allowed it around 2005. Do you know the history of why that happened? It's a question. I don't know the answer. Andrea?
I do. So this was right before I got to the city. There was lots of discussion on the council at the time of wanting home ownership opportunities. And there was a lot of language in the comprehensive plan about home ownership. And the thought process was duplexes mean more rentals and no home ownership. And so there was this big push. Duplexes was taken out of the zoning code. Any reference to encouraging duplexes was taken out of the comprehensive plan. And that's how we got to where we are, and why there's so many duplexes all around the city. It's just something that was prohibited back in 2005. So it's taken a long time. We took the first step with within 500 feet of a center to encourage it. And then now this is the next.
Yeah, and so that brought up something. So 500 feet within a center, that wasn't last year, or was that 2 or 3 years ago that we passed that?
I want to say it was 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, it's been quite some time.
Could you tell me by next week or send an email how many have been developed since we changed that? Is that a possibility? I would think you'd be able to pull that.
We will try.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to create a 40-hour job for you, but I think that would be interesting to see. Okay, we're implementing the tools in the toolbox kit, the toolkit or whatever. Is this really doing anything? Is that a rhetorical question? Do we have any evidence? It's been 3-4 years. Has anybody built within 500 feet? We made the step. Or is this why we're expanding it? Because no one's building within 500 feet. I just want to know the answer. That's all. Yeah,
we'll query the database and see if we can find it.
Okay. And then the last thing, I always see one of the hands pop up. It's like, oh, Eric, shut up. I want to talk. The last thing is, again, my comps. So we know the counties had this on the books for a while. How about Bainbridge Island, Port Orchard, and Poulsbo? Do they allow duplexes and townhomes and, I don't want to say cluster, I want to say cottage housing in R10 or whatever their single family residential zoning is called? So, thank you.
All right, Jennifer.
Andrea, you just brought up an interesting question for me. Sorry, Michael, you said flushed it out now. So here we go. You mentioned back in 2005, there was a lot of emphasis on home ownership. And so here's a larger overarching question with regards to, this potential change in upzoning, missing middle housing. How are we going to promote home ownership with this new type of housing that's proposed? Okay, because we want to keep our home ownership rising, right? I mean, is it more important on a larger scale for us to be promoting rentals or homeownership. I would like to see more programs to promote homeownership, and this is an avenue where there could be more homeownership. So cottage housing, for instance, is that the idea is one developer will own all the cottage houses, or could one person own a cottage house underneath that has the land underneath them?
I think there's potential with having duplexes that you can have the opportunity to condominiumize a development so that somebody could own half of a structure essentially. So I think that there's more opportunity for ownerships when you can have a more compact development, smaller structure that you can buy into and get you into the market than you would have with single family residential where you own all the land that goes with it.
So back in 2005, we almost, my partner and I almost bought a home, but thank goodness we didn't, because we would have been under those predatory loans. But the city did offer, that's what we qualified for at the time. What the city did offer was a program that provided down payment assistance. And my challenge to administration is, if we're going to adopt this code, could we not resurrect this same program, maybe utilizing the excess REIT funds that we've talked about before? I know that there's been some discussion on what to do with those. I would love to see that down payment assistance program resurrected.
We still have it. We still have the program in partnership with community frameworks.
With community frameworks.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's, I'm sorry, Andrea, go ahead.
I was going to say, we still have a program that's in place. So it's trying to get people that can qualify for it and getting structures. That's the problem, is finding units that people can qualify to buy. So there's not enough units. So the more of smaller housing types that we can get, the better off we are.
Okay, so we do have that program still in place, but only in partnership with community frameworks. Now,
Yes.
What I remember from a previous meeting is that, like you're saying just now, they're having trouble getting structures to purchase. Would this be a program that community frameworks could access? Let's say we have, we are able to build more, but because my understanding of community frameworks is that they take
Rehab.
current houses. So it's not a program that's currently able to be used by folks to buy a cottage home or a townhome or a duplex. Yet they can or they cannot. I'm sorry, I saw your head.
So they can buy. I'm sorry, my daughter's in the other room and she's
That's
yelling
okay. I
at
got
the
my
video
cat
game,
jumping all
and
over me too.
I'm sorry that you can hear that.
No, it's okay.
Community frameworks usually rehabs houses. That's their
Right.
model of development.
Exactly.
And they haven't moved toward new home construction because it's been too expensive for them. So if they could develop duplexes, it's a good question. I just don't know that it fits in with their model of what they do.
I wonder if a cottage house model would be something they could harness.
Potentially, and BHA has even talked to us, if these cottage housing options came forward, the cottage housing with some of the bonus density, they might be able to make a project work. And so there's potential there to see that kind of partnership as well. And if you had BHA in partnership with community frameworks with their down payment assistance, we really could get some money moving and get actually people into small little nice houses in home ownership. So there's potential, and we can't solve all these problems with one zoning change. Right now, we've got to do it all in parts. And I'd hate to hold this up from moving forward because we want all these other pieces in place.
I think for me, I'm just a bigger picture kind of person. I'm not good with minutia. And so to see the long game helps me, and to know that the potential is there. Do we know what our home ownership is in Bremerton right now in the city limits? Is it at in the 40s or the 50s? Do we know what our home ownership rate is? Oh, Eric might know. What?
Oh my goodness, we're rehashing old times here, Jennifer.
Good.
So
Hey,
I think I had the city auditor look at home ownership, I think twice. There should be 2 audit reports. Andrea, does that sound right? Or yeah. So Christine can send you those reports.
Okay.
And you know what, home ownership is surprising. And at the time, as I was arguing for more home ownership too. But what's really an eye opener is you look at the city of Seattle, and I believe their homeownership numbers are even lower than Bremerton. So I would, my best guesstimate right now, and this is not an expert, but based on the reports from, I would say we're lucky to have 40% home ownership in the city. And Andre, I don't know if you would disagree with me on that number. That's just a rough stat.
I think it's 37. I'm just guessing, but I
We
think
want to do a pool and then see what the results come in at.
I think that my questions and my wonderings have kind of been addressed, and it's nothing that can be answered with the adoption of this ordinance. But long game, I have some clarity on things. Thank you.
And if I could add too, that the military has a big influence on our community. If you look at similar communities in the East Coast as well as in the West Coast, military communities have a lower home ownership rate because people buy, they move away, but they keep their residences that they bought when they were here. So the military has a lot of influence on our community as well. And a lot of properties just don't flip, is what we saw.
I would still love to see that program expanded again, but we got to get people in houses. So thank you.
Well, thank you. This has been a fantastic discussion, and I think this is really good. I you know, like everything, it's a tool in our toolbox, and I feel it's a move in the right direction. And you know, so we just have to be looking at everything. That's what we've been doing, you know, as we've looked at ADUs and infill and now this middle. And, you know, sometimes there's concerns about, you know, changing the character of neighborhoods, but it would be very slowly, right? It might be a house that goes into receivership. So then, you know, gets torn down and now there's a clear lot. Somebody could come in and put in a duplex. Somebody could put in a row of townhouses or things like that. So it just really frees up. And it's, to me, it's also a solution against sprawl, right? We all love all the greenery and the trees that we have here, and it gives us a way to sort of, you know, fill in and get folks closer to transit, closer to commuting options, hopefully closer to where they work, as opposed to the opposite, which is putting people out where we have trees and having them have to drive their vehicles in and things like that. So, all right. So this will be next week on as a public hearing. Thank you, staff, especially for all the time that went into this before. Great presentation tonight, great answering of questions. This is just great. So actually, Jennifer just posted anything about, I'm wondering if it'd be worth, because we named BHA, I mean, do we want to reach out to community frameworks, or let me ask this question, I suppose. Is it your discretion if community frameworks came to us and wanted in? Could you let them in? Or would we have to?
I would assume that community frameworks might be encouraged to partnership in some way with BHA, especially with BHA with their vouchers. So this is where Garrett and I had a lot of conversations about this, is like anybody who does this and more than likely is going to have that partnership. So even if it was community frameworks proposing the project, if they had a partnership with BHA to provide vouchers for the units, that to me is a partnership and that we could move that forward.
Yeah, just for the record too, there's unused vouchers. So we need more housing where people can use the vouchers. All right, Eric, go ahead.
Well, so you brought that up, and I think that the difference is Bremerton Housing Authority is something that the city of Bremerton has basically given a franchise to handle our housing, whereas BHA, or not BHA, community frameworks, any of the other ones, to the best of my knowledge, those are 501c3s and nonprofits. So I think that's the dividing line that the administration, Andre, you correct me if I'm wrong, that's why we just limited it to probably BHA and the religious organization part and didn't open it up. But I didn't draft this, so, but I think that's probably the reason.
I mean, and you're correct. The list was very long to start with. We had community frameworks, we had a big laundry list, and we're like, well, we don't want to leave somebody off. And this is the first time doing this, and our sample ordinances that we look to only pointed to religious institutions. And so we felt like we were kind of on the edge of doing something, and why it was appropriate to start with just BHA.
All right, again, this will be on a public hearing next